You're listening to Nest Talk, the best and most elite Baltimore Ravens podcast on the internet. Now, here's your host, Christopher Linfante.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Ravens flock, my name is Christopher Linfante, bringing you another edition of the Nest Talk podcast, the best and most elite Baltimore Ravens podcast on the internet. Today is Friday, November 15th. The time of this recording, Nest Talk episode 53, is about 12:40 in the afternoon. And we've got a lot to talk about this week. Obviously, the Ravens made a whole bunch of roster moves. Some interesting things happened in the NFL. And we will, of course, get to the Myles Garrett story. If you did not watch Thursday Night Football, congratulations, because you missed, one of the most gruesome moments I think ever in NFL history, one of the most inexcusable moments in NFL history between Myles Garrett and some Steelers players. So we'll get to that a little bit later in the episode. But first, of course, we want to hit some housekeeping items. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or iTunes, wherever you're listening to this. Like us on YouTube, rate us on iTunes. It always helps other people find the podcast and, of course, helps me get the feedback of what you guys are looking for. If you have any questions for any episodes, we don't have any questions this week, but if you do have any questions for any of the next week's episodes or things you want me to talk about, leave it in the comments section of the YouTube channel or tweet me at Nest Talk. Of course, you can find us at Nest Talk. You can also find us at Be More Feather for the Baltimore Feathers Twitter page. And, of course, you can find us on Facebook as well. Just hit up the Baltimore Feather or Nest Talk on Facebook. And a special shout out to Ken McCusick of Ravens Film Study. He had me on his Film Study podcast on Tuesday. It was a really, really fun time talking with him. Great conversation about some Ravens football, the offensive side of the ball in Cincinnati, which we will get to in this episode as well. I just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. This episode of Nest Talk is sponsored by Property Inspection Pros. Purchasing a home can be stressful and rife with uncertainty. Property Inspection Pros aims to remove all doubt and smooth the acquisition process with thorough, professional service. Their certified professional inspectors provide thorough assessments of every area of the home, then issue a detailed, comprehensive digital report within 24 hours of the inspection. They offer superior convenience and customer service with inspections scheduled on Sunday and during evening hours in addition to standard daytime appointments. With over 200 five-star reviews, it's no wonder why they're Baltimore's best-rated home inspection service. Call them today at 410-709-8144 or go to the website at mdinspectionpros.com. That's 410-709-8144 or mdinspectionpros.com. And our other sponsor for today's episode is none other than our affiliate partner, Foco.com. We have a great deal for all Ravens Flock members and all of our listeners to get 10% off of every purchase on the Foco website. And to do that, all you have to do is go on to Foco, make your order, and when you check out, use the promo code or coupon code FEATHER10. That's FEATHER with the number 10 at the end, and you get 10% off your entire purchase. So we're really happy to bring that to you. They've got a lot of great Ravens merch, Orioles merch, NBA, NHL, even NCAA. They got it all. So go on to Foco.com, use promo code FEATHER10 for 10% off your entire purchase. So thank you to our sponsors for today's episode. And, of course, I want to get right into the Ravens news. We have a ton of news to get through today. And the first thing we need to talk about is the flurry of moves the Baltimore Ravens made on Tuesday. The Ravens made 6 transactions on Tuesday. That's a lot, 6. And I actually wasn't even aware this was going on until after it happened, which was kind of unfortunate because then I had to spend quite a while looking back in time trying to figure out what the Ravens did. But overall, I am appreciative of these moves from Eric DeCosta. I think they're the right moves to have the Ravens make, and we'll talk about each and every one, all 6 of them, and essentially go into what I like about them, what I don't, and what it means for the Baltimore Ravens. And the first is the Ravens brought in Domata Peko, the longtime Bengal. So he's a player that many Ravens fans might already be acquainted with. Now, Domata Peko, I believe, spent 10 years with the Cincinnati Bengals. And after those 10 years in Cincinnati, he moved on to Denver. Actually, it's 11 years in Cincinnati. From 2006 to 2016, that's actually 11 years. Moved on to Denver after that year. And in Denver, he did well, but wasn't the same player he was in Cincinnati, not the star of the show. Now, Domata Peko brings a veteran presence to the Baltimore Ravens. That's key for this Ravens defensive line. They are looking for guys who can come in and give depth, and be able to plug and play pretty quickly. And that's what a veteran on this defensive line might do. Now, the Ravens wanted him earlier in the season when I think Brandon Williams, if I remember correctly, was dealing with some injuries. They thought Domata Peko might be the option, and they were not able to get him. I think that's where Ufamba Kamalu came in, but I could be wrong on that. Please correct me if I am wrong. But now they bring him in on a $1 million deal, that's according to Tom Pelissero, to be that veteran in the group. And the Ravens need some help here because, they have a pretty good run defense this year. It's not the best in the NFL, but it's pretty darn good compared to the rest of how the defense was performing, especially earlier in the year. But, the Ravens had to put Dalen Mack on the IR, which is one of the moves we will talk about, right? And Michael Pierce is currently dealing with an injury. We don't know how long he's going to be out for. So the Ravens need some help to increase their depth on the defensive line unit. If they don't, they're going to be in big trouble moving forward. But this move right here, I think, really helps him out because Peko is a plug-and-play player. He knows how to fit into any defensive scheme, essentially, being such a long-time veteran, 13 years in the league prior to this, and his transition from Cincinnati to Denver. Obviously, it was not the cornerstone of that defense in Denver, but he was still a big part of it, and that's important to have when you're looking for a veteran to essentially replace Pierce or somebody along that line for an extended period of time. Now, after Peko, the Ravens went out and got another defensive tackle, so they were really stocking up on some of these moves. And I like the Peko move, but I'm not really so sure about this move here. Now, I like it just because I think it has potential to be very productive for the Ravens, this player. But, signing two defensive tackles when you're really looking for one here, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, especially because one of the guys I cut, Ufamba Kamalu, he was never active for a game. So, I don't know why they're just going to replace him for someone else who's probably going to be inactive. And Justin Ellis, Jelly is his nickname. But we'll see. Now he earns this nickname. He's 6'2", 350, so he's a big dude. He was a Raider from 2014 to 2018. And he did okay. He was never a, really good starter for the Oakland Raiders. He was a starter for 14 games is his max per year. That was in 2014 and 2017. He's dealt with injuries, of course, and he was actually placed on the injured reserve at the beginning of this year. I think it was the offseason, technically, and he was cut from the injured reserve. That's how he ended up in Baltimore, being able to sign with the Ravens. Over the course of his career, he's got 5 years under his belt, not including this year because he didn't play it all this year so far, but he's got 80 solo tackles, 39 assists, 6 tackles for loss, 3 quarterback hits, 1 sack, and 2 pass deflections, both in the first 2 years of his career. What do I think about Justin Ellis, though? He's not as good as Peko, but he's still going to be a depth player. I think he'll probably fill the same role that Ufamba Kamalu filled when he was with the Ravens, essentially that inactive defensive tackle just on the roster in case the Ravens need to get another D tackle at some point. They can elevate him. I don't know why they decided to cut Kamalu for Ellis, but that was the decision. I think Ellis was actually cut in late October, so maybe he wasn't available when the Ravens went and got Kamalu. But I'm not so sure how much of an upgrade this is. At least he does have a lot of game experience, but those injuries, they're there. But the thing about the injuries, though, is if he's only here for a short period of time for the remainder of this year, using him and hoping he doesn't get injured, you're more likely to have him stay healthy than he would be, if you're trying to use him as a full-time starter, which the Ravens are not. They want to use him either as a rotational player, but my hunch really is the other side of that coin, being a depth player that's going to be mainly inactive for most of his games as a Baltimore Raven, just somebody on the roster they could activate should they need an extra defensive lineman in any given game. The final addition the Ravens made to the active 53-man roster is Iman Marshall. Now, Iman Marshall was designated to return a few weeks ago, and here he is. He's being activated for the first time. Not sure if he's going to play, being active in games, but he's activated to the 53-man roster. For those of you that don't remember, Iman Marshall was the 4th-round pick out of USC this year. He's a big cornerback, 6'1", 210. There's a reason they call him Biggie. Not only can he be a defensive back, but he also gives the Ravens some potential special teams help, and that's critical because the Ravens, don't have Brendan Trawick for now. We'll talk about that a little later in the episode. They lost. They had to get rid of Justin Bethel because that 4th-round pick was honestly. I love Justin Bethel. I love what he brought for us, but we could not keep him for a 4th-round pick to give up. They've gotten production out of Bennett Jackson, I've noticed in the special teams, but someone else on that special teams unit, maybe as a gunner or a blocker or something. The Ravens like to find these rookies and use them and kind of get them integrated with the team that way. And Emmitt Marshall, bring him in, no doubt, will probably be a special teams player before he really gets a lot of time in that secondary. Now, Emmitt Marshall next year, though, that's a whole different story. He'll be in his 2nd year with the team. Jimmy Smith is not likely to be here. I'm not sure about Brendan Carr either. He could be out. So Marcus Peters, if he stays, will be pretty heavily focused on this defense with Marlon Humphrey. They'll be the 2 cornerbacks, assuming they can extend Peters, but they'll need a 3rd guy. And without Jimmy Smith, without Brendan Carr, Tavon Young will be that slot guy. But Emmitt Marshall could be that 3rd cornerback. Anthony Everett's in there too, but disappointing year. Not so much high expectations for him in year 3, I believe he's going into. But Emmitt Marshall, I hope to see some production out of this year so we can see a little bit of him next year and see an expanded role for the corner out of USC. Whether that'll happen, we don't know, though. Of course, this Ravens secondary is stacked right now, so we don't know how much production he's going to get. Now, the Ravens had to make 3 cuts, not 3 cuts, but 3 removals from the roster in order to make room for those 3 players. And the first player they parted ways with is Cyrus Jones. Now, this should not be surprising to anybody who watched the New England Patriots game, to anybody following the situation around Cyrus Jones. Everybody kind of expected Cyrus Jones essentially to be cut. And that's really because he hasn't been a fantastic punt returner, hasn't made a lot of returns that you could go wow over this year. And he had a big fumble in, second to last Sunday now. That game against the New England Patriots, he had a fumble, and it wasn't something the Ravens can really, look at and say it's okay because this guy hasn't had a lot of success. He's not Jacoby Jones. We haven't had a Jacoby Jones since Jacoby Jones. So the Ravens are continually trying to find ways to improve the return specialist game. Now, they did that with D'Anthony Thomas, who I was impressed with against Cincinnati. Had I think it was a punt return where he basically escaped an arm tackle and got an extra 9 yards. So he's got a lot of fight. Now, D'Anthony Thomas has some fumble problems himself, but I believe that it's still an upgrade from Cyrus Jones. And the reason I thought they kept Cyrus Jones because they originally cut Maurice Kennedy to make room for D'Anthony Thomas, even though Maurice Kennedy was doing a lot better than he had ever been at the cornerback position. The reason I thought they were going to keep Cyrus Jones was because they wanted to use him in nickel packages as a true corner and just leave it at that. Or they either weren't sure about what exactly D'Anthony Thomas was going to do for them, so they wanted to make sure he was around. Turns out it's the latter of the two because, Cyrus Jones was inactive completely for Sunday's game against the Cincinnati Bengals, and he would have had no effect anyway because, the secondary is so deep. And look, it tells you something if they like Bennett Jackson. And no disrespect to Bennett Jackson, but Bennett Jackson came in mid-season this year. And it tells you something if they approve him more than Cyrus Jones. They don't want Cyrus Jones to be in the special teams or even on the defense anymore, and that was evident. They made the cut on Tuesday after the game. Once he was inactive, you knew he was gone. Now, another person somewhat in the same situation that Cyrus Jones is in is Chris Moore. Chris Moore with a thumb injury. Honestly, I kind of expect him to either be cut or placed on the IR by the end of the season. I mean, he hasn't done anything for the Ravens, and he's been a special teams player. That's really his niche right now, his niche, because as a wide receiver, he's been very irrelevant. And these are 2 guys we thought would take an expanded role this year. Cyrus Jones with Tavon Young hurt was supposed to be the nickel corner. Hasn't happened yet. Hasn't happened at all now because he's gone. And then Chris Moore, like Cyrus Jones, not being able to produce at his main position. Right, Cyrus Jones is a corner that plays return specialist. Chris Moore is a return specialist as well, special teams guy, that plays wide receiver, and he's made a very insignificant impact this year as well. So a similar fate could be coming for Chris Moore. Now, I don't want to speculate that really, but it has to be noted that if the Ravens make another move soon, he could be at the blunt of it. But according to sources, the Denver Broncos actually picked up Cyrus Jones, which is, honestly, I'm happy for Cyrus Jones because I think he does have value for some teams out there, but not for the Ravens. Now, going to Denver, at least he will probably get some time playing corner as well because that Denver defense, I mean, it's stout, but of course they're pretty much gone for the year, so they're going to try people out, see what they can do for the next couple of years. Maybe he'll earn an extension in Denver, so at least I'm happy for him to end up somewhere. But his time in Baltimore is over. He had 9.4 yards per return this year. Now, compare that to last year with Baltimore, Cyrus Jones. In 11 games with the Ravens last year as a return man, 14.4 yards per return. Tale of two different seasons. Complete difference. 14.4 is very good as a returner. I'm sorry, that's a punt return. But still, I mean, and then, he didn't do any kick returning this year. He only had one kick return last year, I believe. Punt returning last year, 14.4 yards. This year, 9.4 yards. That's 5 yards less every single punt. And you can see where that stacks up. He's really lucky the Ravens' offense is so good because it doesn't matter really where they start. It doesn't. But Cyrus Jones, no longer a Baltimore Raven. Hopefully he can get better in Denver. We'll see how it goes for him. Now, the next Raven that had to get cut was Ufamba Kamalu, and it's not exactly the worst situation for Ufamba Kamalu because the Ravens essentially just downgraded him. And we'll talk about his practice squad situation now that he's on the practice squad in a second here when we get to him and Marcus Applefield in that segment. But Ufamba Kamalu, he was signed off the Patriots practice squad in the bye week. Now, reasons for it, obviously the Ravens wanted defensive tackle depth, but this was right before the Patriots game. Some speculated they wanted inside information. That's why they signed him and Jordan Richards, the safety/special teams guy. I don't really buy that. I think he was just probably the best defensive tackle available at the time for the Ravens to go get. That wasn't named Domata Peko because Peko they couldn't come to an agreement with. So Kamalu, he was a stopgap for some depth, was never active for a Baltimore Ravens game, never fit the scheme enough to be active, and ultimately falls down to being cut from the team just 2 weeks later, essentially. 2 games later, didn't play a single snap. But again, it's not all that bad for Kamalu because he does end up on the Ravens practice squad, and we'll talk about him going on and Marcus Applefield going off as well. And I'm glad he's on the practice squad, honestly, because I think he is a valuable asset for the Ravens. He's someone who knows, at least what the defense looks like, and he can develop maybe in that practice squad. Maybe they're going to bring him back into the all-season roster. We've yet to see what that'll even look like. We're not even close to that point yet. But I always like to see players get a second chance, and he's essentially getting that on the practice squad. So at least he's staying in Baltimore. That's a good thing for him. And now the final cut the Ravens are going to make here, well, actually it's not a cut. It's actually being placed on the injured reserve, and I think I mentioned him earlier in the episode, and that's Dalen Mack is heading to the injured reserve. 6'1", 340, rookie out of Texas A&M. I think he was a 5th-round pick. I forgot to note that here, but don't hold me on that. Active for just 1 game this season, and I think he only had 1 snap in that game. 1 snap. Obviously, it's not very good. But his role on the Ravens was really to be a depth defensive tackle, but, dealing with some injuries. He's actually placed on the IR with a knee injury, so, the Ravens are not going to sacrifice Dalen Mack for the present. There's no reason to, and they can get in Peko, they can get in Ellis, and essentially let Dalen Mack finish the season on the IR. He's season-ending injured reserve. He can't come back after this and reevaluate his status as a Raven next season. Now, it's important he is ready for next season because Michael Pierce will be a free agent, I believe. So, already that's a big shoes to fill. Now, Michael Pierce this year kind of fell off a little bit with the injury now, but he doesn't look exactly the same as he used to. If Dalen Mack improves tremendously next year, and who's to say he hasn't right now? We haven't seen anything out of him. Let's say he looks really good in next year. Next year's offseason, next year's preseason could very well end up with a large role on this Ravens defensive front. Because he's a big dude. I mean, this guy earned the name Mack Truck for a reason. He pulled or pushed or whatever a truck for like half a mile straight. So this dude's strong. He's big. He definitely, I think, has a lot of potential on this Ravens defensive line. And the Ravens are great at finding defensive linemen late in the drafts. That's what he is. Officially, again, I think he was a 5th-round pick. I don't have it here. I can't find it. But out of Texas A&M, he definitely has the potential to develop for the Baltimore Ravens, and I think this is a good move. Overall, just to save him for next year. Don't worry about exciting him this year, exciting that injury any more than it needs to be. Okay, so that's all the moves the Ravens made on Tuesday. Then the Ravens also made some practice squad moves. I believe it was the next day. As I said, Ofamba Kamalu was placed on the practice squad after being cut from the Ravens' 53-man roster. And to make room on the practice squad, they had to cut Marcus Applefield. Now, for those that don't know anything about Marcus Applefield, he was an undrafted rookie this past year, free agent out of the University of Virginia. He's an offensive tackle. He spent time with the Ravens this offseason, and this is actually his second time on the practice squad. He was signed immediately to the practice squad out of the gate right after cuts. I think September 1st, and that was cut September 8th, I believe. I'm not exactly sure if these dates are correct, but that's essentially the timetable. Then he came back last week, and now he's off the team again. Now, I posited last week when he was signed to the practice squad that this was a move essentially to ensure the Ravens had an emergency plan for Ronnie Stanley, because Ronnie Stanley was a little bit banged up after the Patriots game. But Ronnie Stanley seems healthy. He's a very good left tackle. I was talking to Ken McCusick about Ronnie Stanley on the Film Study podcast when I was on. Overall, fantastic tackle for the Baltimore Ravens. I don't think he's the best tackle in the league right now, but he's one of the better ones. And, having him being injured, especially, against a potential Bengals team that's not very good, you don't want to have to overstress him in practice, overstress him in a game if they had to elevate Applefield. But it never came to that. Ronnie Stanley was okay. And now really the need for Marcus Applefield, they just don't have it anymore. So Applefield no longer on the practice squad. Ufamba Kamalu comes in. Now, it doesn't mean for Applefield that his time with the Ravens is completely done. I also noted that the Ravens could definitely bring him on a future contract at the end of the season, in the offseason roster, training camp. Bennett Jackson is a player that they had, they cut, let him go, they run him back again the next year, let him go, and now he's on the Ravens again. So there are guys, I think Robertson Daniel was around for a couple of years. There are guys that kind of hang around the Ravens offseason program for a few years as the Ravens evaluate them further, see if there's any additional production. Applefield, I think, could be one of those guys, but, we won't know until that signing is made, if it's made, this offseason. Moving on now, another piece of Ravens news. We have a lot of news this week. The half of the show is going to be news this week. The Ravens designated Brendan Trawick to return from the IR, and that's pretty big. That's pretty big news right there. Brendan Trawick, obviously, this is his second stint with the Ravens. He was on the Ravens from 2013 to 2015, I believe, 2016, somewhere in there, as a defensive back / special teams player. I think he's a Pro Bowl as a special teams. Yes, he's a Pro Bowl as a special teams player. Was doing well for the Ravens. They had some good plays out of him until in the second game he injured his elbow and had to be placed on the IR after missing practices and games. I think they didn't put him on the IR right away. And now he's eligible to return in I don't know what week it is, but December 8th, the Bills game. And he can practice until then. The Ravens, when you get placed on the practice squad, you have to miss 8 games. That is what every player has to do if they're placed on the practice squad. They can't play for 8 games. That's why we have to wait till December 8th. But he can practice right now. So the Ravens can evaluate his status, and if they don't want to activate him for the injured reserve, I believe they still can pull that lever and put him back on the injured reserve for the rest of the year. But honestly, I think he will probably be active for the game. Now they're going to have to make a roster move to allow for a roster spot to open for Trawick. I'm not going to name any names who I think that might be. I honestly don't know. But Trawick, I think, would be a valuable asset back for the Ravens, especially heading down the road to the playoffs. Bringing in a tough special teams guy who can make some tackles for you, with Bennett Jackson as well, if he stays around on this roster, would be very valuable to the Baltimore Ravens heading down the stretch, looking to make the playoffs, and of course chasing the elusive Super Bowl that Lamar Jackson promised when he was drafted. So whether or not, the Ravens decide to bring Trawick back, it's going to depend on his practice evaluations. But honestly, I do think that he has a very good chance of being brought back for that December 8th game for the Bills. A very, very high chance, I would say. Now, the Ravens are not facing the Bills this week. This week, they are facing the Houston Texans in one of the most anticipated matchups of the year so far. The Patriots game was huge. This game is huge as well. So, without further ado, let's take a look, as we always do, at the Ravens' injury situation heading into this week. There are a few players on the injury report. Not all of them are on here with injury-related absences. Like Brandon Carr was out on Wednesday's practice. And again, for those of you that are new here, we don't have Friday's practice at the time of this recording documented. So we don't know who missed Friday's practice, who was a limited participant, who was a full participant. We are going off of the Wednesday to Thursday change. That's how we're going to try to assess the Ravens' situation here. So Brandon Carr, Mark Ingram, Jimmy Smith, and Brandon Williams all missed a practice this week with a non-injury related absence. Brandon Williams missed it on Thursday. Brandon Carr on Wednesday was a full participant on Thursday. Mark Ingram on Wednesday, full participant on Friday. And Jimmy Smith was out on Wednesday, was a full participant on Friday. So those are guys you don't have to worry about: Carr, Ingram, Smith, and Williams. Guys you might want to worry about is Michael Pierce. Ankle injury, did not participate on both Wednesday and Thursday. Unless something changes today, the day of this recording, Friday, I don't believe Michael Pierce will play. Sorry, my phone just lit up. I thought we had an actual injury update, but we don't yet. So Michael Pierce, I don't think he's going to play on Sunday. I highly doubt it. Then you've got Earl Thomas dealing with a knee injury, didn't participate on Wednesday, although it's listed as knee/not injury related, so I don't know exactly what's going on there, but he was a full participant in Thursday's practice, so I don't see any reason why he would miss the game. Chris Moore, I don't expect to play. He was limited on Wednesday and Thursday with a thumb injury. He's a receiver. You're going to need your thumb to catch the ball, and plus I don't even know if he's caught a ball all year. He hasn't been doing much for the Ravens at all. I would not be surprised, even if he was healthy, if they just kept him inactive for the entire rest of the season. Marquise Brown has an ankle injury, was limited on Wednesday but regressed on Thursday, did not participate. That's concerning, although the Ravens rested Marquise Brown on Friday's practice last week, and he had a huge impact against the Bengals. Maybe they're doing the same thing here. I can't say. The way they've been treating Marquise Brown has been essentially with as much caution as possible, so I don't know the full details on that. I'm really not going to be able to speculate on Marquise Brown's situation, but I don't believe Chris Moore or Michael Pierce would play. I believe Earl Thomas will play, and everybody who's out with a non-injury related absence is going to play unless something happens between now and Sunday. So with that being taken care of, we're going to hit a little commercial break in the middle of this episode here. And once again, thank our sponsor, Property Inspection Pros. As I said earlier, and as you all know, purchasing a home can be very stressful and filled with uncertainty. Property Inspection Pros aims to remove all your doubt and smooth the acquisition process with a thorough professional service. Their certified professional inspectors provide thorough assessments of every area of the home, then issue a detailed, comprehensive digital report within 24 hours of the inspection. They offer superior convenience and customer service with inspections scheduled on Sunday and again, even during evening hours. In addition to the standard daytime appointments, Property Inspection Pros has over 200 five-star reviews. There's no wonder why they're the best rated Baltimore home inspection service. You can call them today at 410-709-8144 or log on to mdinspectionpros.com. And once again, Ravens fans, Foco.com, one of the best and leading producers of NFL merchandise, of official licensed team merchandise, is offering, this is a limited time offer. This only goes to December 12th. 10% off your entire order. So that's if it's a $100 order, you're getting it for $90. If it's a $60 order, you're getting it for $54. You're getting 10% off no matter, it doesn't even have to be Ravens products. Anything you want from Foco.com, all you have to do is use the promo code FEATHER10 at checkout. That's Ravens gear, Orioles gear, Capitals gear. Maybe you're a Yankees fan. I don't know how that's possible, but maybe you are a Yankees fan. You want some Yankees gear? Boom, FEATHER10, 10% off your order. It's great for the holidays. There's some really cool products I'm going to get for myself. There's a light up Ravens beanie Santa Claus hat type of thing. One of the coolest Ravens merchandise pieces ever. You can find that there. It's not out yet. I think it's a pre-order, but I'm probably going to pre-order that for myself. In all honesty, if you want it 10% off, it's only $30, but you want it 10% off, Feather10 for your 10% off purchase on everything at Foco.com. So make sure you use that promo code. Helps me out and it helps you out too, saving you some money on some epic Ravens gear for yourself and your family and friends this holiday season. So I'm thinking about adding some recurring segments on the Nest Talk podcast here, and one of them I'm thinking about, let me know what you guys think of this, is This Week in Stupid. Essentially highlighting a very bad take, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on a talk show, a podcast, someone who makes a very bad Ravens take. I'd like to add that to the show. Let me know what you guys think about this, and whether or not it should become a recurring segment here. And the first, and you know, I don't like punching down on people, right? I'm not going to go after somebody who, you know, doesn't know some fact or something and be like, well, haha, you know, you don't know what the QBR formula is, right? I'm not going to do that. It has to be a take that is so atrociously bad, and someone who is so serious in saying it and doesn't care what the consequences of saying it are. Whether it's a person in the public media, whether it's a person publicly on Twitter, garnering attention and fighting back that attention. You know, I'm not going to go after a four-year-old who says he prefers the Steelers over the Ravens. But, you know, someone who says something really stupid, we're gonna highlight it and say essentially, look, you know, this is why it's wrong. And maybe misspell some misconceptions here. So this week in Stupid, we have at Quantrell Martin on Twitter. If you follow us at Be More Feather, you may have seen this tweet. I said this is probably the worst take in the history of football takes ever. I mean, this is the absolute worst take I've ever seen, and there's no question about it. And he says, with his enlightened words, and I think he's a Browns fan, I'm not exactly sure, but he says, and don't go after this guy, there's no reason to go after him, but I want to highlight this here. The reason Lamar Jackson doesn't get flustered, he says, like second-year quarterbacks, is because he's not intelligent enough to be able to figure out what they're doing. It's crazy where his stupidity helps him. End quote. First of all, how on earth do you come to that conclusion? I mean, really, how does any sane person say, you know what really helps Lamar Jackson? Not his athletic ability. It's not his arm. It's not his speed. It's not his intense love of the game, and it's not the hard work he puts into it. No. He's too stupid to figure out what's going on there, so he just improvises and everything works out. You know, I was interacting with a podcaster, some of you guys might know on YouTube, Joe Nubo, on Twitter, and he said, this guy has got to be a troll. And I really hope he's a troll. I really hope so, because honestly, if this is a serious take, I have no words for it. This is the kind of thing, like, you know, I don't even know. I mean, look, Lamar Jackson, I know he's probably not the smartest man in the world, right? I'm not the smartest man in the world. You know, Lamar Jackson didn't score very highly on the Wonderlic, even though the Wonderlic is a flawed system. I mean, honestly, if you ever see the questions, it's kind of stupid what they, you know, what they make quarterbacks, all the hoops they jump through. If they hadn't prepped for it, I don't think any quarterback would do very well if they don't prep for it. It's, you know, not like an SAT or anything. It's like an IQ test that's kind of weird. But, I mean, honestly, even if this guy is trolling, this is probably a position that a lot of people out there think about. It's that Lamar Jackson is ridiculously stupid. And I'm not going to give motives to anybody. And, you know, a lot of people will say, well, if you listen to him speak, he's stupid because he can't speak, you know, like me, like a podcast or something, like an average person. And look, Lamar Jackson has that southern draw or whatever it is to him. He's not the best at public speaking, but he's 22 years old? I mean, give him a break. You don't have to be the best speaker in the world. And honestly, from the first time I ever heard him speak as a Raven to now, I mean, he's gotten more comfortable up there. He's better at talking. He's, you know, not the easiest to understand at times, but doesn't mean he's stupid. I mean, I think it's just I don't understand how you could possibly make this take. it has to be a troll. It has to be a troll post. And even if it is a troll post, I'm still going to criticize it because it's so stupid to say. I mean, this is the stupidest take I've ever seen in my life. That a quarterback can be so stupid. That he can be so stupid that it helps him because he doesn't know what's going on. If he didn't know what was going on, he'd be throwing picks every single time because he wouldn't be able to identify coverages. He'd be running into brick walls because he wouldn't see the pass rushing schemes coming at him. I think Lamar Jackson has a very high football IQ to counter this point. I really do. I think he has, I compared him to, in a hyperbolic sense, to Bill Walsh's football IQ. He's not Bill Walsh, okay? Bill Walsh, was an offensive mastermind, revolutionized the game. But he's got a very high football IQ as well. Lamar Jackson does. And it's evident in the way he plays. He's able to read coverages. He reads them better than Baker Mayfield, let's put it that way. So I don't know how you could possibly say that Lamar Jackson is so stupid that he's not intelligent enough to figure out what they're doing and it helps him. Because he doesn't get flustered. I think he would be overwhelmed. If he was so stupid that he didn't know what was going on, he'd be overwhelmed out there and still be very flustered. He doesn't get flustered because he knows he's a better athlete. He identifies the coverages. He's got a better arm than a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL do. And the working on those mechanics this offseason really improved them. And again, don't go out and attack this guy on Twitter. I'm 99% sure this is a troll post. He's got to be a troll account. There's no way that you can be this stupid and make that take. There's no possible way. So that's This Week in Stupid. If you guys have a suggestion for a take that's bad, send it my way and maybe I'll consider it. I'm not sure if this can become a running thing. I don't like to directly criticize a lot of people, but when a stupid take is made about the Baltimore Ravens that just doesn't make any sense, you can't let it go unheard. You can't, or uncriticized, because then it's disinformation. And we want to set the record straight. Even if someone's praising the Ravens for something that's not true, like someone's saying the Ravens have had one of the best defenses all year, obviously that wouldn't be true because the opening part of this year was one of the worst defenses. I believe it was Dan Fouts incorrectly said in Sunday's game that Lamar Jackson rarely throws in the pocket. That's 100% not true if you look at the stats. Not exactly stupid. It's not so much as a take. It's just a misspeaking, mischaracterization of his game. But anything you guys want me to highlight as a bad take, let me know, and we'll think about putting that in next week's episode. But another thing, I mean, this isn't so much this stupid, but it's egregious and unacceptable in the National Football League, and that's what Myles Garrett did to Mason Rudolph in last night's Cleveland Browns and Pittsburgh Steelers game. Now, for those of you unaware, I didn't watch the full game. I was pretty busy last night, but stayed up on the score for a little bit. And then on Twitter, I logged on Twitter immediately after it happened. And just all these tweets, Myles Garrett, Myles Garrett, Myles Garrett. I'm like, what is going on with Myles Garrett? And then I see this video. Essentially what Myles Garrett did. For those of you that don't know, for those of you that do, you don't need the explanation. You're visualizing it in your head right now. For those of you that don't know, Myles Garrett ripped off while it was 1 minute left in the fourth quarter or something like that, maybe 3 minutes left, and they're up 14 points. So the game is pretty much done. He tackles Mason Rudolph on a sack, trying to sack him, but Mason Rudolph already threw the ball, and he kind of wiggles him down to the ground. And Mason Rudolph wasn't happy, so he's kind of shoving to get Garrett off of him. And the offensive linemen are looking well, where's the late hit or unnecessary roughness call? And the shoving kind of goes both ways, and all of a sudden, Myles Garrett grips his face mask, right? He starts yanking on it. He yanks his face mask, and he rips the helmet right off of Mason Rudolph. All right, so that's problem number one. That's already dangerous, because one bad tug, and that's a neck injury. And you know how dangerous this could be in football. One bad tug and he's going face into the ground, and that's another concussion for Mason Rudolph. So, that's terrible. First of all, that's the first problem. It kept going, though. It kept going. So Mason Rudolph is trying to get his helmet back, right? He's reaching for his helmet. Myles Garrett is kind of hiding behind, I think it was David DeCastro, who's kind of trying to separate the two. And then all of a sudden, Myles Garrett takes the helmet, swings at Mason Rudolph, and hits him right on the crown of his head with the helmet. Okay, and that is, I don't care, it's not deadly, usually. That's extremely dangerous, though. That is so dangerous to do to somebody. That's a projectile in the air That's a hard helmet made to withstand hits coming down on somebody's bare head. That is extremely dangerous. It probably wouldn't have killed Mason Rudolph if it hit wrong, but it sure as well could have hurt him tremendously. Tremendously. And obviously, that's when everything broke loose. Maurkice Pouncey came in and started punching Myles Garrett. David DeCastro. Honestly, David DeCastro was the only level-headed person in this entire thing because, Mason Rudolph isn't entirely innocent. I mean, obviously, he got the really bad end of this. But he had the original pushing and shoving. It doesn't take away what Myles Garrett does, though. That's the worst thing that happened. Pushing and shoving happens in a football game. Myles Garrett should have been the bigger man, figuratively and literally, because, he literally is the bigger man. And just let Mason Rudolph go and just not deal with him. But he escalated the situation far, far beyond what happened. And Pouncey comes in and starts attacking him. David DeCastro, the most level-headed person in this entire fiasco, essentially, to stop the fight, just pushes Garrett down to the ground and, just covers him. And just, that's it. So, anybody really criticizing DeCastro out there, I really don't see how you can do that. I think he was the most level-headed person. And then Ogunjobi, right, or whatever his name is, comes in and pushes Mason Rudolph to the ground. Mason Rudolph is just standing there at this point, watching the whole thing unfold. I think it's Larry Ogunjobi, something like that, comes in and just pushes him to the ground, just standing there. I mean, that is the... Why even escalate that further? So, numerous suspensions happened. Let me see if I can pull these up for you, because it actually happened maybe an hour ago. All these suspensions came down from the NFL. Myles Garrett is indefinitely suspended from NFL play. Indefinitely suspended. Without pay. The minimum of the remainder of the regular season and postseason. He's going to have to meet with Commissioner Goodell. And I would imagine he's going to have to go through some psychological evaluation because, honestly, there's no way, in my mind, that a mentally healthy individual could attack a defenseless person like that. I mean, I don't care what Mason Rudolph did. I don't care what Mason Rudolph said to him. That is not how you react to a situation, especially with that power dynamic there. Ripping off his helmet and then using that helmet, a projectile, at a defenseless... Literally, I mean, there's the defenseless receiver thing can sometimes be stupid in the NFL because, they're catching the ball. Obviously, they're going to be defenseless, but you got to make a tackle. When it's after the play and, I mean, you're essentially using a weapon to attack somebody on the football field, I don't care what Mason Rudolph said. I don't care if Mason Rudolph tried to rip off your helmet. I don't care if Mason Rudolph punched you in the face, wherever. That is entirely unacceptable. And this is the right decision by the NFL to definitely suspend him for at least the rest of the season. Pouncey has been suspended without pay for 3 games for punching and kicking. I mean, when someone does that to your teammate, to your quarterback, to someone you feel like you're a brother with, it's very difficult to hold back. I can't really, I can't really blame Maurkice Pouncey there. Especially, I mean, if you remember what happened with Flacco, not to bring up a bad memory here, but in 2017, the Kiko Alonso hit. I mean, I'm sure 90% of us out there were relieved that Ryan Jensen was able to go in and stick up for Joe Flacco and essentially, not attack Kiko Alonso, but, give him a what for that. Your offensive lineman being a protector of your quarterback, if they just did nothing, I'd be kind of questioning what happened, but at least it shows that there's some, respect for one another there, and, it's unacceptable, and something had to be done, and Pouncey took it on himself. Whether or not it's the right thing to escalate a situation, I honestly, in my heart, I really can't blame him for that. So, another suspension, Ogunjobi was suspended for a game, fined an additional amount for the unnecessary roughness. That was the hit on Mason Rudolph. He was just standing there at that point without his helmet, just watching the whole brawl unfold, and Ogunjobi pushed him to the floor for no apparent reason. I mean, he was just standing there. That I don't get. And that was probably the stupidest move of all. Because he definitely saw what happened. I don't know why he would come up and just push him to the ground. The NFL says there's additional discipline for other players coming. So I have no idea whether Mason Rudolph is going to be suspended for the punching and kicking he gave to Myles Garrett at first, or whatever he said. I don't know. Maybe the official heard it. But something ticked off Myles Garrett. And, he's had some issues all year. And honestly, I don't want to spend too much time on this because this isn't, the Ravens here. But this is a Cleveland problem. There's no discipline in Cleveland. I mean, Odell Beckham Jr. was punching Marlon Humphrey and trying to rip his helmet off. What did Freddie Kitchens do about that? Nothing. Essentially just blame Marlon Humphrey. What does Freddie Kitchens do about anything? Myles Garrett has had some other issues this year. I don't know the specifics, but according to all accounts, he's not been the cleanest player this year. Not a single fine, not a single suspension, no punishments for any antics. Freddie Kitchens is way over his head. And let me tell you something. If this was John Harbaugh's team and Myles Garrett did that, honestly, I don't think that he would have had to wait for the NFL to make the decision. I think Harbaugh would have just suspended him right then, right there for the rest of the season and reconsidered his entire future with the Ravens. And that's the difference between these two teams. You have one strong head coach for the Baltimore Ravens that doesn't put up with this junk, would never put up with this junk. The Browns, so dysfunctional, don't know how to discipline their team. And I'm not saying discipline like a little kid. This is unacceptable. And the fact that it's not tolerated. This obviously isn't tolerated by the Browns. But, it just doesn't happen overnight. You just don't wake up in the morning and say, let me go out and do this to somebody. Something there has to have been repeated over and over and over again, actions to lead up to this point. Otherwise, it makes no sense. So, and look, I liked Myles Garrett. I really did. I thought he was a good guy coming out of the draft. And now you have this. He cannot be mentally healthy. I'm sorry. He is not in a good position right now for himself. But back to the Ravens here. I had to touch on that because it was so gross for the NFL. Such a bad moment. You can't have that in the National Football League. It's already dangerous enough. But back to the Ravens here. I want to talk about the game recap in Cincinnati. If you want a more in-depth version of my game recap, go check out the Chem Acoustic Film Study podcast that I went on about the offense. We talked maybe for an hour and 10 minutes about the offense in that game, so I had a ball doing that. So I get really in-depth there. But, of course, here, there's a few key points. First of all, I want to say congratulations to Greg Roman, because Greg Roman is a genius. He's a genius. What Greg Roman did to the Cincinnati Bengals is something that a lot of offensive coordinators would be way too chicken to do. Essentially, Greg Roman got away from what the Ravens typically do to exploit easy matchups. And what I mean by that is the Ravens are a power run team. They've been like this all season, except Miami, where they just slice and dice them to death. There was a lot of passing in Arizona. There's a few games where they passed a lot, but against New England, they ran way more than passed. Against Cincinnati, in the first game of the season, they ran way more than they passed. And the key to all those games was keeping the ball on the ground, running the time of possession, giving those teams limited opportunities to make plays, to make drives where they could score points. That was the overall Ravens strategy. So the Bengals were completely prepared to go in and attempt to stop the run, to force Mark Ingram, Justice Hill, Gus Edwards, Lamar Jackson into situations where the running wasn't going to be as beneficial. Now, it's the Bengals. They probably would have been able to run all over them. But the Ravens said, you know what? Let's make them an example to other teams. Let's just show them what we can do through the air, too, because they're not going to expect it. And the first play of the game reminded me of some of those Flacco moments when some of the first plays of the game, they just come out and sling it a couple times. It's exactly what they did. Marquise Brown, 49 yards to the air. First play of the game. Set the tone. Lamar Jackson would finish 223 in the air, 15 out of 17 attempts, 3 touchdowns. 2 of them to Mark Andrews. The Ravens sliced and diced Cincinnati through the air. They didn't even win the time of possession. Now, of course, time of possession here is going to be skewed a little bit because of the way the Ravens scored 2 defensive touchdowns. But 36-11, That's how much Cincinnati held it for. The Ravens held it for 23-49. Even with those two defensive touchdowns, the way the Ravens dominated on the ground, you'd be so convinced that it would be a much closer score, but it wasn't. Mark Ingram only had like 34 yards on the ground on 9 attempts. The Ravens were committed to the pass this entire game. Lamar finished with a perfect passer rating again this season, 158.3. That's the second time he's done it this season. It's the first time since Ben Roethlisberger did it in like 2007 or some ridiculous thing. Two perfect passer ratings in a year, which honestly surprises me. I would have expected it to be more than that, but still. And Lamar Jackson cements himself as MVP frontrunner with this because there's no way to stop him. And I mean, he was taken out in the fourth quarter. These numbers would have been even inflated more if he played in the fourth quarter. The Ravens scored so many points. The defense took care of 2 drives. The Ravens were missing 2 offensive drives. Just imagine if he had 2 more drives. He would have had, and say in the third quarter, well above 300 passing yards. I think he was Air Player of the Week again. He also had that 47-yard Houdini run, as Kevin Harlan said. I mean, insane day for Lamar Jackson. And really, Greg Roman coming out of the gate, dedicating himself to the pass, with tight ends too. Nick Boyle's impact in this game was extreme. Not just as a blocker, but as a pass catcher. You don't expect Nick Boyle to go over 70 yards receiving, do you? Because that's what he did. And the Bengals had no matchup for him. They had no matchup for Hayden Hurst, no matchup for Mark Andrews. There were 3 Ravens tight ends that caught a pass. Only 2 receivers caught a pass. Willie Snead caught 2 passes for 12 yards. Marquise Brown got like 80 yards on 4 catches or some ridiculous number. Or 3 catches, whatever it is, because, his speed. But the Ravens being able to diversify this offense, really getting to the passing attack now. It's really amazing. And hats off for that Heisman play that RG3 apparently came up with the idea for, and Roman implemented it, the pitch to RG3. As I said to Ken, teams are going to have to prepare for that. For at least the next 4 games, teams are going to look at that and say, what happens if the Ravens run this? And how do you even defend that? How? With a triple option? With 3 Heisman guys, RG3, Lamar Jackson, and Mark Ingram in the backfield? I have absolutely no clue how you can possibly defend that. So, I mean, hats off to Greg Roman for this entire game plan that really destroyed the Cincinnati Bengals. Hats off to Lamar Jackson for being a fantastic MVP candidate player. Just a fantastic game. Great diversification by Greg Roman. Now, moving on to our final section here for the podcast today, and that's the look ahead, as we always do, to the next game. And this time we've got the Houston Texans. Now, the Houston Texans are sitting at 6-3. They are a contender for the Super Bowl, and of course a contender for a first-round bye as well. Really one of the Ravens' main competitions for this first-round bye. I say that because a win by the Texans here would even the playing field between them and give the Texans the tiebreaker should the Ravens and Texans finish the same record. If they both get to 7-3, there's a very good chance they do finish the same record, and then the Texans would get that tiebreaker. If the Baltimore Ravens beat the Texans, they get to 8 wins, so they at least finish 500 on the year. Plus, they have a tiebreaker over the Texans. So if they got to 11 wins and the Texans got to 11 wins, then right out the gate, the Ravens would have that edge on them in the seeding, and of course probably a first-round bye if that's the case. Now, that's the playoff implication. Can the Ravens win this game? It's going to come down to, it's going to be a really good game. We're going to have 3 key players, and of course we want to look over and see their injury report. Now, there are a few players injured. None of them are on this injury report with a non-injury related absence. So that's interesting for the Ravens at least. Dylan Cole, the inside linebacker, has a knee injury, was limited in both Wednesday and Thursday's practice. Again, we don't have Friday's practice for these guys. They're in the Central Time Zone, so they practice later than the Ravens as well, so we're not even going to bother waiting. Will Fuller, the wide receiver, hamstring injury, limited practice on Wednesday, limited on Thursday as well. Deshaun Gibson Sr., the safety, has a back/wrist injury. He is limited both on Wednesday and Thursday. Essentially, everybody's limited every day on this. Titus Howard, guard/tackle, knee injury, limited Wednesday, limited Thursday. Bradley Roby, former Denver Bronco cornerback, hamstring injury, limited Thursday and the Wednesday practice. Laramie Tunsil, the former Miami Dolphin tackle, has a shoulder injury. He was limited on Wednesday and limited on Thursday as well. So all these guys could play depending on their Friday status. All of them maybe could be absent. It entirely depends on how the Texans coaching staff, how the medical staff evaluates their situation for Sunday's game. And really, the biggest missing piece here for the Texans would be Laramie Tunsil, their left tackle. If he plays, then it's the two left tackles in the top 10 of the 2015 draft going up against each other, right? Laramie Tunsil was picked 10th, although he was supposed to be picked first. Ronnie Stanley was picked before Tunsil, and, the whole, don't want to get too into it here, but the whole incident around Tunsil, through the social media video of him doing a certain drug, was spread like wildfire. It was released during the draft, and it cost him millions of dollars for slipping down. That was huge travesty for him, honestly. But, the Ravens said they liked Ronnie Stanley more than Tunsil to begin with. They said, I think they said he wasn't even on their board before the incident. They didn't take him off the board at all. He just wasn't there. They wanted Stanley, that's the guy they got, and the Dolphins wanted Tunsil, that's the guy they want, but obviously their whole crazy rebuilding fiasco now probably won't even get the first pick with Cincinnati tanking so hard with their situation. But Tunsil now in Houston, it would be an interesting matchup to see him and Stanley on the same field, but we may not see that. Now, the three key players for the Houston Texans to win this game, a couple are obvious. One I want to highlight, not super obvious, but I think would be an interesting matchup to follow throughout the game. The first is the most obvious. It's the other MVP candidate. The Ravens have faced like two MVP candidates so far, Russell Wilson and now Deshaun Watson. Now, when you look at the MVP race, there are three players who are atop the conversation of most people. There's Russell Wilson, there's Lamar Jackson, and there's Deshaun Watson. So, those are the three guys that honestly are really in the running for MVP. Pat Mahomes, not so much this year, having a good year, but he's probably not going to win MVP. Christian McCaffrey, a lot of people are talking about him, but honestly, I don't see it, although he really could win it. I think he'll win Offensive Player of the Year. Deshaun Watson is a quarterback very much like Lamar, and all these mobile quarterbacks are taking over the NFL. Russell Wilson really is the oldest one here, but he's still doing very well. Watson, like Lamar Jackson, lots of running ability, has a great arm, but the thing about Watson's game is a little different than Lamar. Lamar has a lot more design runs than Watson does, and I think Lamar is faster than Watson, and more agile, more elusive than Watson. Watson is a great player in his own right, and I thought he was the best quarterback coming out of that draft class. He was in the 2017 draft class, with Pat Mahomes. I think that was Mitch Trubisky's draft class too. I thought Deshaun Watson was the absolute best quarterback, and I think, overall, Pat Mahomes is fantastic too. He was unexpectedly great, but Watson's a fantastic quarterback. And these two guys going up, it's going to be very fun to watch. In Seattle, it was a super rainy day. You didn't have a lot of offensive fireworks, but there were some great plays in there. I think this is going to be one of the best games of the year for the NFL, at least in terms of viewer base, and I think it's going to be a very great matchup for the Ravens fans to watch too. What can Deshaun Watson do to this Ravens defense to give the Texans the edge? And on the flip side, what can the Ravens defense do to Deshaun Watson to give them the edge? I'm not exactly sure because it's going to be very difficult to bottle him up. He's a fantastic player in this MVP conversation for a reason, but the Ravens will need to do something to try and limit his impact on the game. Now, another player that's going to be key to the Texans' game plan is Whitney Mercilus. Now, Mercilus is their best pass rusher with J.J. Watt out. He's got, I think, 5.5 sacks this year. They're still going to protect Lamar. He's not the biggest threat because the Texans, obviously 5.5 sacks, not the best possible number this deep into the season, but he's still their best pass rusher. And, if Ronnie Stanley is a little banged up still, which I don't think he is, but if for some reason he re-aggravates something, it could be a problem. Now, Lamar Jackson is super elusive. How many sacks is he going to take? I don't know. But you want to keep him upright. You always want to keep your quarterback upright. And, the Ravens may try to do a lot of passing again this game, like they did in Cincinnati. they might try to open up the vertical offense. And getting Marquise Brown down the field, he's super fast, but it's going to take a couple seconds. And you're going to need to be able to sit in the pocket for 3, 4, 5 seconds. And whoever's got Whitney Merciless is going to have to be able to give Lamar Jackson that time, whether it's Orlando Brown, whether it's Ronnie Stanley, whoever he lines up against. So that's going to be a crucial player for the Texans. And finally, it's Kenny Stills. And you're going to be asking me, why Kenny Stills? Why not DeAndre Hopkins? Hopkins is too easy to say is going to be X factor. We know DeAndre Hopkins is one of the best wide receivers in the league right now. He's going up against Marlon Humphrey. That's going to be a very interesting matchup. But I'm more concerned about the Kenny Stills, Jimmy Smith matchup than I am about the Marlon Humphrey, DeAndre Hopkins matchup. Because Marlon Humphrey locked down OBJ. He's locked down Juju Smith-Schuster. He locked down Julio Jones last year. He's locked down basically every receiver that's going up against him. I'm not really sure how DeAndre Hopkins is going to fare against Marlon Humphrey. But Jimmy Smith is in his 30s. Kenny Stills is one of the faster guys in the league. Very fast. Speed burner. Can Jimmy Smith keep up with Kenny Stills? Or can Kenny Stills get around Jimmy Smith enough times in order to exploit that matchup? Because with all eyes on DeAndre Hopkins, and even Will Fuller, if he's on the field with his hamstring injury, him and Marcus Peters could be going at it. Kenny Stills is going to have to go up against third corner. And Jimmy Smith is very good, but he's not a super speedy guy. Now, maybe they move him and Peters around to compensate for that. But, a Stills versus Smith matchup, I think would be very interesting to watch. And I think Stills could give the Texans the edge on offense that they need to get past this Ravens secondary. Because if they need to start moving pieces around, maybe that's the way the Texans can open up the secondary, which is much improved from the beginning of the year. This is not the same secondary that lost to the Cleveland Browns. It's an entirely different one. Marcus Peters, Jimmy Smith is in. Josh Bynes and LJ Ford are not secondary members, but they're huge at the inside linebacker position. And nothing against Pete Onwaso, but moving back to the, the will now? Moving back to the will, fantastic spot for him. So those are our 3 key players, Deshaun Watson, Whitney Merciless, and Kenny Stills. You'll get our 3 key Ravens players on Preview and Predictions, which comes out tomorrow morning, maybe tonight if I have enough time to write it all. Special thanks to this week's sponsor again, Property Inspection Pros. Purchasing a home can be stressful and rife with uncertainty. Property Inspection Pros aims to remove all doubt and smooth the acquisition process with thorough professional service. Their certified professional inspectors provide thorough assessments of every area of the home. Then they issue a detailed, comprehensive digital report within 24 hours of the inspection. They offer superior convenience and customer service, with inspections scheduled on Sunday and even during evening hours, in addition to standard daytime appointments. With over 200 5-star reviews, it's no wonder why they're Baltimore's best home inspection service. Call them today at 410-709-8144 or go to the website at mdinspectionpros.com. That's 410-709-8144 or mdinspectionpros.com. Again, foco.com for the best Ravens merch. Use promo code or coupon code FEATHER10 at checkout for 10% off your entire purchase of all Ravens gear, of all NFL gear, NCAA, Orioles, whatever, Red Sox, Steelers, if you want to buy it and burn it, whatever, you can get it 10% off. Finally, you can find us again at Nest Talk on Twitter, at BeMoreFeather on Twitter for the blog, and of course me at Chris Linfante on Twitter. Search us up on Facebook, Baltimore Feather or the Nest Talk Podcast there, and you can like us there. Go to BaltimoreFeather.com for the latest, greatest Ravens news and opinion articles. Subscribe to our email news list. That way you get all the latest news right into your email, so you don't even need to check anything except your email inbox. If you're listening on iTunes, subscribe there and give us a rating for some feedback. And, of course, YouTube, like us or dislike us on YouTube, and, of course, subscribe there. If you have any questions or conversations you want me to have in next week's episode of Nest Talk, you can leave a comment on the YouTube video or tweet us at Nest Talk, or even send an email, info@baltimorefeather.com, whatever you prefer. So that's it for this week's episode of Nest Talk. Episode 53 is now concluded. We will see you next week after the Ravens hopefully beat the Houston Texans, and then we'll look ahead to the next game, which I believe is the Los Angeles Rams, which will be very interesting. So I'm Chris Linfante signing out. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.